Hello. The hyper-simultaneous can be used to heal nature. As it is, has been measured and maintained. A human fact tribute nature breaching method measures and maintains other things, others, or selves, blamed for what it caused historically, what it's causing actively with that foundation. For example, where the suburbs were tactically denatured before our founders were born, semi unsafe, and smaller than the colonists wanted them to be. Also, note something I learned through notes at Central Connecticut State University, which is distinct from the book. Also, how that book is stolen and people pretend not to realize the part about where it says George James Madison got George Washington to agree to counter the people involved with the fact sheeping nature torture slash S, extortion slash S, and fact sheeping nature slavery of themselves, sickly distinctly from everyone else. And they had to hide their roles and their actual motivations for coming together with the Constitutional Convention and with the Declaration of Independence. They only had the means to speak openly for those causes, like in other words, because of they were counter extorted, forced to. There were more than 13 colonies themselves divided. See, they were, and Native Americans too helped this become, because they were while they were fighting with each other, the breaching method was showing themselves. It was being shown to themselves. When too, it was using to like blaming it on the white man. This is black and white semi-ancient legal identities who had collusion with putting black and white in there and holding the different natures of slavery in between the nations. Pantheism was revealed as 1/3. There are proofs it is more probable and practical too. We have to take counter positions to the convictions and the theories with the ages of history, with the sciences, where they make short words of convictions, leaving out how this use employed names, black pupils. We know instantly, who could deny that what assigned black and white to mean other than they did before our founders were born. Again, too, in Russia. Notice how in Russia and America the suburbs look exactly the same. This is an identity slash identity of value slash value progression, possessions slash hyperpossession, maintaining roles with it as the plural part, unfathoming, but to extents where everyone undiscerns the rest, everyone doesn't understand. Like, for example, Hartford Hospital is in the process of making confessions and demonstrations of their roles with mental health people who have been stealing mass amounts under the fake guise of mental health. They're putting fake transcripts where and how the agencies with them, intelligence, the difference of that, their family members, the difference of the sources, news at the same time, planting evidences. Forgiveness is because there were a whole bunch of foreign and domestic, same thing there. See suits and ties. See counters and exceptions as collusions, using exceptions and exception nature. Black pupils, we have the same color eyes, different color eyes at the same time. Some people have the same color eyes too, and different color skin. Whoa. So we are individual group differences slash S in individual body, species, human species body of individual body. Nature teaches about things with difference slash S, but humanity was then forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to blame other things, others, ourselves for the real causes of real insidious causes of negative value, nature, progressions, acts in nature, acts to hurt, trick, persuade humanity to counter as factory nature improperly, and the difference of how and when also used. Because everyone, how could they do that? This force tricked, hurt, and persuaded them in defenses of themselves. Everyone, there are proofs that it's more probable and practical that a semi-ancient hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise realized it had to become or it was going to get caught for transnational, organized crime, but it would also involve the government's people and the difference of overt criminal enterprises and private ones. But even though of a nature nowhere near what those are described as now. See, they don't themselves understand. They didn't, just like they didn't then. The overt criminal enterprises, private ones, the three branches of government, and the rest of the intelligence tied to them, like people with prisons, they're all used remotely. The communications locations, all distinctly to hide, to measure, maintain quality aspects, in fact, human nature as criminal insidiousness slash hyper criminal insidiousness. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a police form. Not a criminal. The media and the intelligence community record, confess, demonstrate, confirm that they can't be honest when people are speak clear or when they speak unclear per their roles with the breaching method, where it uses identity slash S as roles with its system, its method, as a system, tactical ulterior. That these are all tactically ulterior from the one that's also positive unto itself regarding the nature and the environment. Colonization set up also why and how industry had to be formed upon rivers. Colonization set up, for example, why and how our founders communicated for us to understand that Native Americans are 1/3 of our founders. James Madison and George Washington with them are another third of our founders. And the founders who had to be counter extorted are another third of our founders. And then all the differences between how the colonists were hurt for what, under what guise or motivation. The Native Americans, individual groups, hurting themselves before Comanche and Apache were fighting each other. Humanity had long been sustained. Uses of science's names, uses of an application, propagated. Tactical as use of names A through Z, tactical ulterior from how nature employed them. Our difference slash S. It is its own. Humanity did not reveal how humanity has two eyes, and the fish have two eyes. We have quality aspects in nature, distinct, non-distinct, simultaneous slash hyper simultaneous is what nature is showing us. The nature of debate was employed by a human fact human nature breaching method, singular, and it sustained itself in all forced all roles. And here we come to, for example, the value peacefully slash hyper peacefully There's a difference between peace and hyper peace because there is hyper simultaneous, distinct from how there is simultaneous. Again, there is the identity of value progression. That is itself not our species and is not the other species that revealed why and how. Totally different species have quality aspects, nature, even insects have a shared identity of consciousness, awareness. So the nature of theory and the nature of debate and research, data, these locations where are recorded originally still used criminally for and influence tactically delusions raw. The difference between how it was there was guilt of overt criminal enterprises, private ones, the intelligence community as the interbranch or the intelligence, and the difference of that, and or family members, any one of those natures of criminal insidiousness. Jim Crow laws were partly about this. Counters that were our collusion self-value, not realizing that there are extensions relative to where and how used remotely, better than effectively, consciously. Our self-value roles with uses of the names of the sciences, abridged, and this is increasingly self-value rules with uses of others' names and nature of debate regarding names or the value of that in place of proper fact treatment, nature, quality, aspects of nature, premises treatment, sequence treatment, and names used, and meaning, and relativity slash hyper relativity, three ways, and as the value of what actually was first, and as actually that which employs questions to be asked and answered, but again as its system, and again as the relativity of that, where there are distinct natures of. I mean, it can be simultaneously positive to itself or not. For example, nature itself this way demonstrates the difference between positive used as a criminal insidiousness nature. For example, a truth used for a lie by that person or by someone else. And or if the difference, where the difference is being used, black pupils, before you were born, before your parents were born, before their parents were born, before your founding parents were born, at countries A through Z, at groupings of humanity A through Z, that had been employed to be self defended and self valued as systems individually grouped in together, tactical ulterior, from the one that has an identity of relationship to itself, that is capable of it means out of nowhere, even though these means have been here. You know, hundreds of millions of dollars a day under the guise of healthcare being stolen, all kinds of scams under the guise of being lawyers. Lawyers have scams on a mass scale. And there are only 350 streets in Hartford. And there are real medicine people and real doctors at Hartford Hospital. See, we have police forms who are psychiatry. We have judges and prosecutors that have long been profiting certain type of victim slash hyper victim we need forgiveness for too, because there are people that are being and haven't been used remotely by way worse, and this is relative to where and to how they blamed other things other themselves, where and how the answer is one of the answers that is increasingly generating more of them is what caused slavery was a human factory nature breaching method, a slavery method, a torture method, an extortion method, to induce syntactically manifest phenomena and quality of fact should be nature uses and roles self-value that can't defend themselves and afford to protract short words with convictions proper at any location, especially some ways too, because look how the impositions on the formal locations. Then they go back and forth with facts, leaving out exceptions, exception nature, leaving out how that was since they were kids, people have been putting fake passions and emotions to others. That's one of the ways they collude. They timed collusions between all these different countries with difference. And here and there, where we are shared, it is tactically ulterior from how nature shows us to be inseparable. Try to stay inseparable more and more. The way it is gonna increasingly be, while simultaneously try to be independent more and more simultaneously. The way it is going to be, it shows us the increasing value of the simultaneous because it is the hyper simultaneous. It is why we have six names for the verb, not one. It is why subjects have individual grouped and together. That which is the identities, the three distinct identities of zero. It is the identity of forever nature that is greater than, is more finite to infinity, and is active relativity to infinity. That we could only accord with, slash hyper accord with, that way, and trying to appreciate what was is true always, as itself, which came before. And as itself, as that extent we know is beyond the extent we know to come of the future, but we don't know about it as itself, though, as the perfect system. Because if we care about those five identities of time simultaneously, that is the one identity. That's like the little parts of your body individually grouped in together, caring about your complete identity, even though they're not it. They are it anyway. They could go off and try to be another system. In other words, you can make that, try to do that with other people. You're doing it as a nature, as it, because everybody is its own. We have the same color eyes, different color eyes at the same kind of time because it's communicating about difference. We have other in place of these answers. The identity of relativity slash hyper relativity is real. We have the same color eyes, different color eyes. We have the other species have the same quality aspects in nature, the way we do, consciousness the way we do. And it wasn't prevented by themselves or by ourselves. This is one of the ways we could discern a distinct identity of hyper simultaneous nature. The sounds have a better than living identity of relationship to itself, as does that identity per scientific, that is a scientific value, as its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that, which revealed this per science, not using the word God, for observation. God is a variable where someone might say, like in other words, where someone might use it to note that a positive or a hyper positive could be made out of a negative. But there's a difference between a positive made from a negative that's the criminal insidiousness nature of positive, let alone one's self value while being used and having been used remotely, not just there, but to hide where and how each location slash S was his actually being and having been used. One truth that is used for a lie is that computers use, in other words, to break sequence. Computers are positive or negative and relative to sequence and relative to simultaneous, individual, grouped, and simultaneous. And everything comes with the hyper simultaneous in demonstration of itself, the hyper simultaneous. Put the word, put the preface hyper before any word, and put the suffix nat as a word nature. A law, a hyper law in nature is communicating with us to heal the voices of the law, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, insidiousness to the identities of logic A through Z, and or that body is sensed and that is accounted for and adapted to until self-valued rules are maintained, individually grouped together, even if it is a majority of people, even if it is a majority of countries. This is recorded, hyper-evidentially true, relative to how Russia, America, and China, and India, and they have the means. We have the means to transverse the earth, but through others who are still abridged and pretending other, because they are still victims slash hyper victims. And when they pretend other, we are not allowed. I mean, we are not afforded what we were supposed to be afforded per our founders for this method. This method measured and maintained what our founders communicated to us that is greater than, is more finite than, and is active relativity increasingly to what they being distinctly from what they said. For example, they communicated to us not to allow the words of what they said to be used to screen how and why they were tortured, extorted, in fact, human nature enslaved, and had to hide their actual motivation with their narratives. They had to lie about themselves and had to hide roles with the breaching method entrenched the way it was and already having been long sustained. Method slash S in the plural since semi ancient times. Modern were religious books were written with consciousness that the difference of the people countering them, the religions, and the people preserving them, that would be and is also used by the breaching method, a certain type of victim slash hyper victim, too, employed to blame other things, others, or selves, not even fathoming. The only reason environmental and damages and nature damages have sustained so long, such weak. See how a little kid could discern when we are little kids. We are told the crazy people who were sustained abuses of Native Americans, sickly distinctly from the sustained from themselves. They were already had themselves. How they describe that, they blame other things, other themselves, even when correctly, tactically wrong, exactly with the breaching method wanted and needs. Know how England is way smaller than the British Empire. In other words, in other words, know how everyone leaves out how the Republic. Nature shows us, for example, too, the Republic. It was more probable and practical that the Republic and the Legion never moved without tribes and exceptions. in exception nature because of the way there are three ways grouped and there are five ways grouped distinctly, that the five parts of the identity of time, of the identity of forever nature, that is one of the hyper additional things that the identity of the hyper simultaneous is. Again, too, as the identity of relativity slash hyper relativity. Three ways. And again, with the value of sequence truth before this, and as the value of that identity, the time it's showing us, we don't know about. While it's showing us, there's an extent we know about it, showing us what's positive five ways at once or not. But it's also showing us the hyper additional value of the contemplation behind how and why actually we have questions and other people have questions, and or relativity, the value of sequence first, because it leads our questions, not and or else that person is sensed, even if it is a group of people, even if it is a majority of nations, black pupils. The second we hear that, we know it was other than was described by the people describing what caused things like slavery. It is how one, not one, identity brought integrity to this conversation. It is how that is increasingly, while self valuing, no, other things, others, or selves, blamed for what forced employed uses of black and white to mean tactically ulterior from what they do. Where how nature is constantly communicating with this. Difference. See, we have differences. The nature of debate is maintained. So collusion slash S, where either the overt criminal, the difference between the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, the interbranch, or the intelligence, and the difference of that too. This employed fact nature styles. This employed fact nature uses that can't defend its nature and afford counters to that nature of criminal insidiousness, shared by the styles of logic as as depicted with the theaters of history as told. All. So the excuses with this, these are also propagated, self-cultivated. The approach of approaching the sciences, we can discern them abridged. And self-value rolls with that. This is styles of logic that pretends they didn't do their homework. That's what they pretend they believe. And when they really believe that, they have delusions too. See the phrase criminal foreign influence, criminally influenced. See the phrase criminal insidiousness, black pupils. See the breaching method. Did crazy things individually grouped in together to keep from some ancient times already. Use of difference slash S as systems tactical ulterior from its own. Use singular of identity to measure and maintain through use of names, through use S of names, and with difference, including male, female. They want to have nature of debate about prejudice or phobia or motives, where and how the intelligence, overt criminal enterprise, ZIS, plural, and private ones never stopped having at the same time with styles of logic A through Z, like regarding how they would defend to convictions they have per voting, per the relativity of why and how people are wrong. They chose to point to attack the mental competence of President / Chief Biden, where he was talking about how he's trying to get them to get reliefs for Israelis. This is simultaneously / hyper simultaneously, where it never stopped being used, where the voices A through Z, suits and ties, counters to them, and exceptions never stopped being used better than perfectly by the breaching method. Their names, their difference, because it's using identities. So millions of dollars a day, faked mental health care, police, courts, judges, their family members, little fake tricks. They're making fun, they're demonstrating, they're planting evidences. They're calling things before these sick courts and the sick identities of jobs A through Z, who spoke for and mind black pupils. Certain forgiveness is because we're going to have to use lists and demonstrate this tied to the breaching method that is also present here, needing to be named a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise. Nature shows us to write the ACE Act, the Anti Hyper Archetypal Criminal Enterprise Act. Nature shows us. I'm not even a lawyer. Nature, I'm not police, I'm not judge. Nature itself shows us the identity the scientists share. Boxing, martial arts, and wrestling. They're about fighting, but by the rules. Had we followed the rules, in other words, we would have brought revelation. Because not only are foreign names here and there shared and independent simultaneously, tactical terror by nature, though. There's a hyper foreign body. Even if it's only self value, the identity of negative value, nature, progression, acts, and natures. For example, it employed the human factory nature breaching method. We have to counter the breaching method. And to do this properly, we have to counter a hyperarchetypal criminal enterprise. And this is simultaneously admitting we need reliefs. Of course, we need injunctive reliefs. Look at New York City. The suburbs were designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and nature. While being a landscape theater, having had the phenomenon of the breaching method having employed more and more, the only means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and nature would be to cause criminal insidiousness natures of positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures as timed collusion /S with the overt / insidious negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. And so consciously to keep screened, so worse than just screened, the identity of the breaching method, its identity of relationship to ourselves, and the only increasing value of the discernment of that per nature itself. Because any extent of nature we could discern as a subject, individually grouped or together, it still has two, no, as simultaneous. All the subjects together, for example, a program has other sub-programs grouped. It's being, in other words, main operating system. These are all mimic. This is all inside how this one identity of value / value progression its identity of relationship to itself as an equal second, as though that is 2/3 of itself, and the value of that. And but its identity of relationship to itself not being a volume is equal to being a volume relative to again to proper appreciation of how we are actually active value and where and how with the inherent and the progressive again that extent of the future we can discern now as value. But we have discernment of it through systems tactical ulterior from its own. The value of the spring, the value of the human species bodies A through Z, of which I sing boxing. Boxing, martial arts, and wrestling. They deal with grappling distinctly, non distinctly, and simultaneously. With the regarding this is a good comedy, but good joke could be you guys all time treatments. You guys are preventing mandated law. My name is Anthony Wall. Truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. In the Ninth Circuit Court next to the World Trade Center towers, leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since. Three different extended people and their extended family members, and a whole bunch of people tied to them, had roles with a whole bunch of nations there, here and there. Unity and independence, tactical ulterior from how by nature, not by accident. Forgiveness is to stay focused on that breaching method by using the simultaneous. Witch trials, even if made up, Jim Crow laws, and slavery. That's about the human fact, human nature, breaching method, the torture, extortion, slavery method that our founders communicated for us to understand was preventing our founders from communicating because it had already entrenched. For example, slavery, North and South, torture methods, extortion methods, the design of the suburbs. The only means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, natures, more and more to rely on things from other locations. No, tactical terror from how nature showed that too is more probable and practical and demonstrable to convict, to theorize, let alone to convict. Nature showed some Native Americans to travel back and forth with the seasons, just like the Canadian geese. And like with how long it takes for fruit to come, how only comes once a season. See, we're now systems. Nature does. You think nature wants us to have positive and valued conversations like about food through these systems where those people are stacked in New York City? The suburbs were designed for the torture, extortion, slavery of our founders. What were the buildings in New York City designed for? How and why really was and is. The design of the designs of the veterans buildings manifest the way they are, the same exact way, using that method that employed its own causing individually, and it causes the things it caused grouped and all together. It effectively measures and maintains self-cultivated roles, needs, and natures, right where it hurts that self individually grouped and together, blaming other things, others, themselves, and or that body is sensed. Again, even if that body is a majority of people, black pupils. So WFSB has roles with intelligence families that had roles with all sides in criminal and civil cases when I was a little kid and when I was adult. Intercity, certain type of victim slash hyper victim with names next to their location, as names involved the same way with Fox Connecticut News and with WTNH, and with wire crime acts and methods that also involve a child game called telephone. Also involved with where and how. Revelations come from where and how. The fact that slavery, another thing it's about, is an identity theft, fraud, slander method, three ways manifest. Another thing is fake sciences that pretend others simultaneously. Another thing it's about is the uses where all exceptions, exception nature, are in demonstration of the same thing. Slash S, which is the breaching method. That employed people to pretend to begin to really believe that prejudice it needs to be countered. It wasn't prejudice what made the Comanche fight with the Apache. It was a human fact, human nature breaching method that had been sustained before anyone's had been born. Now, who the only reason the nature of debate between people stays. It was going to be employed criminally foreign influence, fact, human nature, quality aspects of nature at each stage of fact, human nature. What is wise and what is smart, and who is, or what the value of other words, in positive or negative. That is used to measure and maintain again, but through our own. And that has only allowed to be. That was only ever allowed to be. And so manifest our precedents and statutes having been criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought. If we look simultaneously at what had been discovered through all the cases, I put a link to Judge Napolitano's YouTube channel. He reported in one of his videos that he had 400. It's like unbelievable. I know, I'm pretty sure he said that 400 arraignments in one day when he first became a Superior Court judge. Boxing. See, they're backing people into identities of jobs and of titles. With a lead up to each of the sciences, names uses is used to measure and maintain roles with some uses of the names of the sciences of bridge, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought. Black pupils, we know this. So there are lawyers who will help us for free. In other words, in other words, these are people that work at the World Trade Center who are involved with names uses as premises and or pretending they don't like people or do like people, leaving out exceptions and exception nature, leaving out what is actually recorded, which is relative to where and to how this breaching method measures and maintains. Other things others are ourselves blamed for what it's still causing. And it shows the identities of law that they need to hide, how they already had roles of this. When you guys were little kids, the adults were shown obligations to blame a human fact, human nature breaching method for slavery, not our founders. They were obligated to teach you the difference of how the breaching method had them tortured, extorted, enslaved, incensed, and through our own. And if they revealed that any other way than they did, lying about their motivations. In other words, it's think about that, pretending to be against taxes while slavery is entrenched. What the heck are you doing with the taxes? Yeah. There are only 350 streets in Hartford. They're stealing thousands and thousands a day. Single individuals, and then their whole families there, under the guise of healthcare, under fake conversations with people aware of how they use investigators remotely, criminally foreign influenced / hyper criminally foreign influenced, 3 ways, worse than war crimes. They have the religious names, putting sequence shifts, having people say things, and then pretend we had a conversation. Like they have people with their religious spots and the differences of judges and prosecutors with their religions, their sexual differences, the people tied to them, their motivations, narrative, certain type of victim / hyper victim, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, child defenders, leaders of the kids, because of the way they have abuses of their own kids too. The difference of that's all recorded. See, the courts have been using the right to lie and using readings of statutes and backgrounds that the breaching method knew they would be. The breaching method knew they have all these different countries on off campuses shared here and there. Even fire campuses and medical campuses. They have roles with this. With our country, the Russians and Americans failed together to discern what to sign the suburbs. They can't speak for logistics. How could they speak for logistics? They have a Rob Rodriguez also involved with the word logistics, with the Wethersfield Police Facebook page, leaking. They're switching names, forging names. Their volume is used by the breaching method, where and how it is also attaching everyone to faked and changed communications with ourselves, for how they get away with keeping the fakes, using others' names, only ever having been heard by everyone. So you have to have forgiveness and stay on the predicate acts I noted to you and the names involved, because Wethersfield Police increasingly have roles with the names with the World Trade Center. This is Wethersfield Police in Connecticut, and their roles with state police, families, interstates, as ones tied to whiting forensics, involved before I was born, when I was a little kid, when I was a young man, and I was an adult, with a whole bunch of people tied to mayors, who also have roles with West Hartford locations, and roles with the border, the Canadian border, and the Mexican, bunch of different ways, as names with timed roles of planting evidences and with remote uses of investigators, per them also, with all kinds of juxtaposed methods, plural, by the singular one, and where and how there are revelations that come from asking yourself questions the way nature asks, like where, how, and why. Could other things, others, or selves be self-valued, communicated than what nature communicates for us to communicate about things? Is Song of Witch Boxing. In other words, there was a recent, so they don't know how to use our names, let alone the country's names. How are we going to use our country's names? In other words, there are proofs that yin yang with no con- conjunction, therefore invisible but still discernible subject between it, and alpha and omega with and between it, and that could be used in other words as an invisible but discernible conjunction. But everything is also simultaneously a hyperconjunction, and it shows us the identity of relativity slash hyperrelativity is a singular identity of volume, its identity of relationship to itself. And the value of that are three ways manifest as volume. And this is where its identity of relationship to itself is equivalent to being volume, where volume equals value as nature slash nature is value. Because that's what's actually staying in conjunction to everything, even once it's gone. That's why it's important to be its hypernative system. Being hypernative, it shows us the increasing value of indigenous and of the difference between indigenous and indigenous is hyper additional. It makes more hyper native by being more native. But see, the native A through Z, our names fell into the same trap. The same self-valued identity of and where and how self-value used remotely. Identity of negative value, nature, progression, acts in nature. Act in nature. In other words, we are in an identity of negative value, nature, progression, and it's being self-valued because of how we used remotely with the employments of differences A through Z. And then further, where and how names are hyper additionally the grounds voicing slash S, not as the grounds in what in the nature's identities, but anyway, again, per where and how everything is its identity anyway, and it's connecting the value of that. English is revealed to teach this. In other words, the modern countries don't remember the history of their English, their sciences, because they have only heard summaries of them, which contain demonstrations of roles with a breaching method, demonstrations of roles self-value with used remotely, criminally foreign influence, factual nature, quality aspects in nature, natures of convictions, natures of theories, natures of names uses, natures of difference use. Our founders with some Native Americans, demonstrably more probably and demonstrably off the record because they would have been sensed and discerned by the breaching method. It was against the law, even countries grouped as they were, and those companies, their value systems, their identities of logic, their natures of logic, incapable of defending themselves and of affording to portray, to be, let alone to protract, convictions made by the what is constant or variable relative to how nature demonstrates us to make convictions regarding how it uses it though. It uses what is constant or variable to show us while it's showing us its identity relationship to itself. And the value of that are three equally increasing volumes All exceptions, exception nature that appear to be a demonstration of other, for example, its identity relationship to itself, not being a volume. Again, this comes with appreciation of how we're actually active. I'm active or grouped values are part of the value progression. And when that's being completed, forever nature is making more of itself through temporary slash lasting identities of value slash value progression. Heaven and hell were revealed more probably and demonstrably as scientific values relative to nature's demonstration of this, how it is and uses, and is making and it to show and shows how hyper additional nature works, how more and more hyper additional nature is being made. What is what multiplies or is divisive is exceptions and is exception nature and demonstration of the same thing and with and as everything is a special difference this way. We hear many pray. Many prayers were never heard, but that is what the wind you hear still tell. Break ancient and or semi-ancient spells. So to admit these plus better than free. We go like that. We make moves. We make things legal. We make things we don't even. We're charging ourselves for being ripped off at countries A through Z, for being tortured at countries A through Z, for being extorted, and being factory nature enslaved. All exceptions, exception nature that appear to be a demonstration of other things. The demonstration of other demonstrations, the same thing. But those demonstrations, instead of being allowed to demonstrate how what nature's actually demonstrating, how it actually demonstrates, and how to check if we know its system. To check, we don't leave out the smallest finite detail. Per its questions, though, per how it uses the value of what came first. And this is relative to also where how is recorded how it was even motivated, even though there's apparent motivations that are blamed. How people could even be motivated to pretend not to discern that the suburbs are tactically denatured and causing negative value nature progressions, action nature. There are not even worms alive in the grass in the ground anymore. And the worms, when it's raining, the worms come out. The birds no longer have bugs, but what's there? See, the system will only be able to, in other words, Earth's a special difference. Your own special difference is forced from here, these of IDs. Because humanity can be systems tactical ulterior than its own, as Earth's value too. But that will be forced from here. And that helps show its negative identity relationship to itself. And where how the importance of understanding that as a volume, even though it is not one, will be discerned. Not one has learned. Vaccines. So, in other words, guilt defense is formal, informal. That is employed. The breaching method new styles of logic, natures of logic would have debates about research or what is or what how to describe other people's names or motivation. or how to respond when people ask to have mandated law followed, black pupils. These are, in other words, we have to look at the ground where it's manifest, understanding how the suburbs were designed and what they were designed for. To know how to who would help first, even because we're all equally hurt by this game with the black and white. But at ground locations, A through Z, it is sickly distinctly. Rather than play the game, who's right, it's a team. Who employed that teams to be tactical ulterior from this human species volume science? Therefore, fact, human nature, quality aspects, nature, employment per itself, free speech, free religion, free what is it, the Ninth Amendment, where we have rights that are too innumerable there's too many of them to list. And the Constitution is supposed to be gotten abridged. That's why it's important too to understand how this breaching method uses names. We just stay with the abridgments and using the black people still, and don't blame it on other things other than ourselves. And have forgiveness when the other nations' names use ours and blame us. Because only morons spoke for all sides. And that was shown to each person, where each person those morons are simultaneously smart people. But in other words, again, regarding that criminal insidiousness, regarding where and how unnatural things were pretended natural, while people are pretending they can't discern the difference between natural as criminally foreign influence and or as criminal insidiousness and or the difference. That's because people were sensed that were used to this very breaching method employed identities of titles, names, uses, where people we would sense for itself if anyone is making convictions for what nature is actually demonstrating. And nature actually demonstrated. Prejudice was employed by a breaching method to be blamed instead of itself, for example, or to sense that through our own, who already spoke for the law pretending to be against prejudice or racism, black pupils. There are only like 350 streets in Hartford, Connecticut. There are individuals who've been stealing thousands of dollars a day rolls, let alone a whole bunch of them. In other words, every day, under the guise of healthcare, under the guise of safety, like with fires, under the guise of life saving, under the guise of military, black peoples, look at the suburbs, let alone the cities. Discern how Hartford is a suburban/urban, and look if that description is still there that way. Any pray, someone record it. In other words, we are in this trap that was set up before our founders were born. And ourselves, were blamed for what our founders told us to blame it on, communicated for us to blame it on the breaching method. Things like slavery, things like witch trials. Even if it was completely made up, it was about that breaching method, that torture, extortion, slavery method, that identity theft, fraud, slander method, only capable of being if to make formal conviction, if to make formal theories, let alone convictions. Yeah, in other words, they have entertained, would never had the integrity to speak for. Science is A through Z. And or as well as blaming them wrong. Exactly the way the breaching method wants and needs. All different. We have to be led by the hyper invisible but still discernible. Everything. So we're going to observe in this programming. So I'm being leaking my own programming, which uses cartoons. There are proofs that before they came with the motions for the video thing, because the Facebook and the FBI and state police, Weatherfield police, military police, they have roles with their campuses and with the departments individually grouped and together used remotely also, because there's remote uses of names of the sciences, names of our countries, the names of the differences as subjects. In other words, values like negotiations. They have contained the elements that are in the furtherance of what worst uses and has used. Why actually all modern countries, even if they're powerful, per those definitions of power, they have problems with their borders. This is because of the employments of identity/identities by this breaching method, this hyper breaching method, singular, slash S. And the slash part is the self value part, suits and ties, counters, exceptions, and are complete victims too. So this breaching method employed everyone to blame other things other than themselves, only capable of being. Like that. We go like that. We make evolution, fruits, gets means out of water, nowhere. It could create more energy dropping water than it takes to lift it. Can make safety where there's a fire and something breaks down with that, it stays in this thing's contained. Can make houses a little wider, easier to keep them clean. Have grounds, identity relationship to itself and the value of that. Where we agree to help each other as names A through Z, as a species volume, as all groupings of it, or we sense. It teaches us about grouping. It is why the value of notes grouped as chords are manifest. That's what they are in demonstration of. Its identity relationship to itself, and the value of that is 3 equal volumes. The value of sequence before this, and the value of that which is to come. Vaccine. I'll whisper hum. Vaccine is fun. One way. It generates all of the ways. I think we can free the world, though. In other words, I'll donate a game. If someone donates the worker, in other words, to make a New York game, put it in the cheapest rental location, or someone donate a location, and we'll use pamphleteers because the species body cries in pamphleteers. And fake science is not only upon New York City, distinctly from every city, but it's also being denied, and that's upon them too. All exceptions and exception nature as collusions, not by accident. Forgiveness is to show how this is a maintained outcome /S. And where and how it employed again. Other things, others, or selves. Self-value, being and having been blamed, where and how nature uses negative value, nature progressions, acts, and natures, or positive ones. Where and how it is manifest with the invisible /hyper invisible to an extent. And that comes with where and how it explains why and how we contemplate and what we are asking why for and how. But see, these answers have been forbidden, as have been all readings of our rights and of the Constitution and of its ground conjunction /S. And here where we are hyper additional nature, as the value of ground, as for the value of ground to the identities of programs, where this identity of value/value progression, with the breaching methods program, again, but self-value roles, and this shows them these things. In other words, this shows people A through Z. So we're going to examine this. We have to follow mandated law because everyone's trying to adapt. I'll give you guys forgiveness if you just follow mandated law. Connecticut Interbranch switched names. They're also doing this through time, lying about their motivations with the people that putting the fake things in databases. Increasingly, a bunch of people on off Hartford Hospital have roles with spots on Church Street in Old Weathersfield, and with Weathersfield's original locations left with slavery and left with the breaching method that had countries individually grouped together with that too. The difference of that to have a whole bunch of nature's needs, interests, needed to sense for itself. Roles with styles of logic and of nature and or of names uses and or of sequence shifts self-value with and as roles with communications each to each. They contain demonstrations of roles with the breaching method, black pupils. This is a part of why and how they prevented anyone from voicing what we actually were capable of discerning at each age of fact sheet nature and got away with it. Put fake things in databases. I was going to say, I forget. Thank you, people.